First of all, I want to say thank you very much to our guests today, Vegas Tenold and Miri Cypers, both from the Anti-Defamation League. Miri, the director of our Northwest office of the Anti-Defamation League. And I'll start out by introducing Vegas, and then he'll get a chance to present and talk about extremism. Some of you may already know that Vegas Tenold is an investigative researcher for the Anti-Defamation League's Center on Extremism, where he specializes in white supremacy and conspiracy theories. A former journalist, he spent close to a decade embedding with some of the most violent white supremacist organizations in the country, and wrote the book Everything You Love Will Burn: Inside the Rebirth of White Nationalism in America. As a journalist, Mr. Tenold also covered the far right in America for years, as well as human rights in Russia, conflict in Central Asia and the Middle East, and national security. A graduate of Columbia University School of Journalism, his work has appeared in publications including the New York Times, Rolling Stone, and the New Republic. He was born and raised in Norway and lives currently in Brooklyn. So I'm very pleased to welcome Vegas Tenold and all of our other attendees today.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you for that very, very thorough bio. I'd forgotten there was so much to me. Hello, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm in a very cold and gray and drizzly East Coast afternoon right now. And I'm afraid my topic for today isn't much cheerier. So should I just jump on in, or, okay. Well, as Neil mentioned, I'm an investigative researcher at the Center on Extremism. The Center on Extremism is an agency within the ADL, and our job is pretty much monitoring, disrupting, and exposing extremism across the ideological spectrum. We're sort of keeping tabs on everything from right-wing extremism, white supremacy, left-wing, religious extremism, all kinds of stuff. But you know, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that lately the far right is keeping us far busier than any other movement, any other extremist movement. But what we do is kind of we inhabit the spaces where extremists gather. A lot of that is online these days, and we try to observe as much as possible. We work closely with law enforcement. Whenever something pops up that raises red flags, we collaborate closely with law enforcement and help them do their jobs. We also train law enforcement, but of course, we are also a civil rights organization. So we're not just running to the cops with everything we see, but we see a lot and we say a lot. And we also help out our regional offices, like the one Miri runs, and the regional offices help us out a lot as well. They're kind of our eyes and ears on the ground. So for today, I'm going to spend, I don't know, 15 minutes or so talking about what we're seeing across America today, kind of focusing a little bit on the upcoming election. Yeah, and I guess we'll do questions after, or I'm happy to do it however you want. So let me just try to get technology to work with me for a moment so I can share my screen. Neil, can you give me a thumbs up if that's working? All right, good, cool. Yes, so we went through all this, ADL Center on Extremism. So first off, we've made this kind of handy timeline because 2020 feels like it's already gone on forever. And there's been a lot of stuff that feels like it happened a lifetime ago. But for us, all this craziness, to use a very technical professional term, kind of kicked off around January 20th in Richmond, Virginia, at something called the Virginia Lobby Day. This is when thousands of people, I think we estimate almost 20,000 people, gun rights activists, descended on the Virginia state capitol to protest new gun legislation. And this was predominantly right-wing groups, militia groups, but there were also left-wing groups as well who felt that their right to bear arms was important. But this was really kind of the first time we saw a lot of the new players on the ground. This was one of the first times we saw Boogaloo Boys, who I'm going to talk a little bit about later. And we really saw the far right kind of coalesce around this one thing. This was militia people. It was, as I mentioned, Boogaloo Boys. There were Proud Boys there. So we had really a big variety of groups. Then, of course, Corona. That was around the time that also Corona struck, and immediately that was the subject of a lot of conspiracy theories. A lot of people blamed the Chinese. A lot of people blamed the Jews. People kind of blamed everything. People who research conspiracy theories have a term called it's called reciprocity, which is to say that something that has a huge impact on our life, we find it confusing that should have a small origin. So people couldn't quite fathom that this thing that had brought America to its knees, or indeed the world to its knees, was just something that happened in an open air market in China. So people, or extremists at least, had all these wild theories about what had happened. After a while, we saw these reopened protests start cropping up around the country. And these weren't all extremist related, but a lot of them kind of got hijacked by extremists. The Operation Gridlock one in Lansing, Michigan. You had Columbus, Ohio, where militia people made their way into the state capitol. So you started seeing all these large gatherings with heavily armed people across the country. And again, people from different parts of the right joining in. All of a sudden, you had QAnon people, you had Proud Boys people, you had Boogaloo people. So really, it was a continuation of what we'd seen in Virginia with disparate groups kind of getting together. Then, of course, May 25, the tragic murder of George Floyd and the nationwide protests that spurred. Pretty much immediately, various far-right groups kind of seized on what they saw as just kind of out of control protesting. And they used that to really build a name for themselves. So they started going to the street as well. And you really had this sense of like vigilante justice. These groups saw it as their jobs to kind of protect law and order and to help police, so to speak. This led to an attack on law enforcement. A federal officer was killed outside the Oakland courthouse by some members of the Boogaloo Boys. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Boogaloo movement is. So don't worry if it's a little bit confusing, because it's confusing to me, which led to arrests of 3 people. And then this whole thing kind of culminated on August 25 in Kenosha, Washington, when Kyle Rittenhouse, a young kid, hugely influenced by this sort of fetishization of law enforcement, influenced by militia. He was part of, or he'd been sort of called by a militia in Kenosha, opened fire, and he killed 1 protester and injured 2. And what this did, it really set the scene for what was to come. The people who participated in these protests already felt like they were almost in a war. And now that there was this death, that really struck home with a lot of people. So now people really believed they were at war with the other side, which, only 4 days later, someone on the left opened fire, a self-identified not a member of Antifa. You can't really be a member of Antifa. But anyway, Kyle Renault shoots and kills Patriot Prayer member Aaron J. Danielson in Portland. Now, this is the only left-wing related murder in 25 years. Of course, the far right sort of seized on that immediately, saying that the left, that Antifa was out of control. But, the numbers don't really bear that out. This was the first one since we started counting. And anyway, at least since 1993. And then finally, this is all very bare bones, of course. A lot of stuff happened in between this. But then on October 8th, there was the kidnapping plot in Michigan, where 14 people were arrested in a plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer and kind of hold a public trial for her. So just briefly on this, they were associated with a militia cell called the Wolverine Watchmen in Michigan. They belong to something that they called 3%ers. 3%ers is a broad term for the militia movement, and it refers to the erroneous notion that only 3% of Americans fought in the Revolutionary War. Now, some of these members identify as 3%ers, some as Boogaloo members, but they were talking about storming the state capitol, kidnapping Governor Whitmer, and starting a civil war. And they had trained for this for a long time. So this was really a wake-up call for a lot of people. So the Boogaloo movement, it refers to an old breakdancing term called electric boogaloo, but they just seized on that word, and it's a slang reference now to a future civil war or a future collapse of society that these guys anticipate and embrace and kind of try to bring about. Ideologically, they're kind of all over the place. You have Boogaloo boys who are identifying more or less as sort of white supremacists. Then you have people, we've seen Boogaloo boys show up at pro-law enforcement Blue Lives Matter rallies. And then when Black Lives Matter counter-protesters come along, the Boogaloo boys just kind of switch sides because they are very, very leery of law enforcement as well. These are people who like to participate in real-world activities. They show up at protests and rallies, always armed to the teeth, and they wear these Hawaiian shirts for reasons, like who knows. This is a subculture that was born on the internet, and it's all in jokes, and it's all its own language and stuff, sort of designed to keep people guessing. But it's a very anti-government ideology, anti-authority, anti-police. But it's a new movement, so it's still very much in flux. But these guys have been arrested for crimes up to and including murder and terrorist plots. Another trend that we're seeing these days, and this has been going on for a while, is people preparing for a civil war. Some want it to happen, some are concerned, but a lot of people on the far right really seem to believe that for one reason or another, most of these reasons involve some kind of coup, stealing the election from President Trump, that the civil war is coming. And you kind of, I kind of almost get it. Like sometimes it feels like people are so filled with animosity these days that you can almost see it coming. Linked to that are all these accusations of a planned coup. Now these accusations are coming from militant extremists. They're coming from conspiracy theorists like QAnon. They're also kind of coming from more mainstream. I mean, the idea of voter fraud, of Democrats stealing the election, is something that is almost becoming more mainstream these days, and it's a little scary. Look, on the bottom right here, you have Blaze TV, which is Glenn Beck's outlet, which is, almost mainstream, kind of spreading these notions of a upcoming civil war. Part of this is a part of the movement, a subgroup of the movement that we call the accelerationist movement. These are militant, armed, extremist white supremacists who are actively hoping to bring about this armed conflict. They believe that if society collapses, if law enforcement collapses, then they can bring about the white homeland that they so pine for. This is something that's been going on for a while, like this idea of a societal collapse to cleanse the world of people of color and of Jews. Of course, this is something Charles Manson talked about. But lately, over the last couple of years, it's really become a movement, and we've seen a lot of groups actively work toward this. And these are groups who have been linked to murders, to terrorist plots. So this is a real thing, and it's a frightening thing. Then, of course, it is the lionization of Kyle Rittenhouse. Again, this whole narrative that we are at war, that conservatives are being targeted, and we need brave patriots, quote unquote, like Kyle Rittenhouse to fight back. And it's almost like that, that they forget that he's just a 17-year-old kid. He's a hero to these people, and they encourage people to act like him. As I mentioned, the 3%ers who are now very, very active. These guys are a little funny because they're very anti-government, anti-state, and traditionally we saw a spike in these guys around 2008, 2009 with the election of Barack Obama, because they were freaked out by the strong state that Barack Obama would bring about. Now, of course, they are very much protecting the current administration and the current government. They're extremely pro-Trump. So they've kind of had a little bit of a switcheroo. As it says here, they have a history of criminal activity, and there's some people to watch out for. A part of this is also the Oath Keepers, which is a subset of the 3%ers. They try to focus on recruiting former law enforcement and former military. They show up at a lot of rallies armed. They sometimes self-deputize for Republican rallies to be quote unquote security. Recently, the other day, their leader, a guy called Stuart Rhodes, I think, yeah, that's his name. He went on a talk show and said that they were ready to show up at polls to protect Republican voters. They were ready to kill in the upcoming civil war, and they were ready to fight in the streets. So this is a group that's becoming increasingly radicalized, and a group that we're very concerned about. Then there are these guys, the Proud Boys. Some of you may remember them from the first presidential debate when Donald Trump went and said, "Stand back, stand by." The Proud Boys aren't. They're far right. They're not white supremacists. They have their leader. Let me go back. The guy on the left here with the sunglasses is their leader, Enrique Tarrio. He's black and Cuban, so they're not explicitly white supremacists. They have Jewish members, they have members of color, but they are far right, and they often collaborate with white supremacists. So we say that they sometimes work in the service of white supremacy, and you can be a white supremacist and still have members of colors just as much as you can be a misogynist and still be a woman. Those things don't need to exclude one another. These guys see themselves very much like as the brown shirts of Donald Trump. They see themselves as his security arm almost. Looking at some of the screen captures here on the right, this was immediately after Trump called them out during the debate. Standing by, sir. We will stand down, sir. They believe that they're being told to wait for trouble to start immediately post-election and then be ready. These guys are very active in the streets. They've been linked to numerous acts of violence. They pretty much exist to fight left-wing counter-protesters. Some of them white supremacists, some of them not, but extremely problematic. And then there are Antifa, which is a pretty misunderstood movement, I would say. Vice President Biden got it right in the debate when he said that they're an idea, not an organization. What you're looking at here is a small subset of the people who identify as Antifa. Of course, Antifa is short for anti-fascist, which is something I think we should all be. But what you're looking at here is a small subset known as Black Bloc. These are people who believe that violence is a legitimate tool fighting fascism, that any form of fighting fascism is self-defense. The majority of people who identify as anti-fascist, they don't do this kind of work. Most of what Antifa does is identify far-right activists, white supremacists, and release their documents. There's also a wide variety of community organizing that goes into anti-fascist work. But of course, a small subset of it is violent, and we certainly don't believe that violence is the solution to this at all. So we look with concern on people who are violent in the street like this. And then finally, it's QAnon, which really needs a whole thing to itself. It's a massive, sprawling conspiracy theory that has spread from the sewers of the internet into the mainstream. We identify roughly 80 candidates for office, former and current candidates for office who believe in QAnon. Very quickly, QAnon is a conspiracy theory that says that the world for a generation has been run by a secret cabal of child murdering pedophiles, and that Trump has been recruited to fight this cabal, and that Biden is actively one of the leading people in the cabal, Hillary Clinton, of course, as well. So it's a very dark, bleak, scary conspiracy theory that's gaining traction, that we've seen moved into the real world. We can connect it to murders, to kidnappings, to violence. And it is really frightening to see how this conspiracy theory has gained a foothold within the Republican Party. Trump, of course, claims that he doesn't know anything about QAnon, which is almost frightening in itself. I feel like that's information that he should have, but that, they're against pedophilia, and so is he. So he's also given them a kind of a shout out. What he said in his town hall was very exciting for the QAnon community out there. Then, of course, there's election disinformation, which is coming from a host of sources. We believe some is coming from abroad, some is coming from within, some is coming from elected politicians. So this is something, a lot of people talk about, what if the Proud Boys show up at polling places? What if extremists show up at polling places? And we're not seeing much evidence of that. But what we are seeing is evidence of this vast disinformation campaign designed to spread doubt about the legitimacy of the election and whatever result we might have. So this is something we really are keeping a close eye on. All this kind of stuff about disappearing ballots, people destroying ballots, just there's a lot of it. And again, misinformation and conspiracy theories, the old chestnut that anti-fascists or counter-protesters are being paid by George Soros. Yeah, there's just a lot. Oh, sorry, this is for another. I don't know why that's there. Never mind. That was pretty much as quick as I could make it. There's a ton of other stuff that I'm happy to go over. If you guys have any questions, whatever you need, I'm here for you guys.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that overview, Vegas. We do have a few questions that have come in, so I'll go ahead and read them off. The first question was, are the individuals who are focused on the idea of civil war trying to bring about such a civil war by and large, or are most of them just preparing to react if a civil war occurs?
Mainly it's the latter. Most people are just they seem happy warning about this impending civil war, and also, buying guns and canned food and all that stuff. But then you also have this small subset of people who actively are planning to bring it about. And these are the people we are concerned about. So as I said, there are several subsets within this movement who are trying to bring about this collapse, the accelerationists, the Boogaloo boys, these kinds of people. And these are the people we are concerned about. So it's both.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question, and I'll try to kind of parse what the intention here was, but the questioner can jump in if they want to. The relationship of police to extremists or militias, and this questioner is asking because of the federal killing of the supposed Portland Antifa person who may have killed a right-wing protester in Portland. So it's something you alluded to earlier. So I guess this person is asking about the relationship of police to extremists at this point.
We haven't seen any evidence of collaboration or anything like that. There doesn't seem to be anything untoward there. We were concerned with Kyle Rittenhouse and them giving kind of water and saying thank you to the militias for being there. We would really prefer that law enforcement doesn't encourage this kind of public display of military tactics from civilians or vigilantism, and to the large part they don't. So no, we're not seeing any kind of collaboration, I think. If that was the question.
Yeah, so that was my question, and I just wanted to add, because in some cases there have been sheriffs, which are part of law enforcement in Michigan or wherever, in some places that are friends with the militia and speak at militia rallies, and so, but obviously they must be in the minority, and so not too concerning. What do you think?
I mean, it depends on the militia as well, to be honest. Like the militias come in all shapes and sizes. Most of these people are kind of just weekend warriors who want to get out there with their buddies and pretend they were in Vietnam or God knows. So just, not all militias are problematic. And if you want to go into the woods of Michigan and run around with your gun, then, more power to you. It's not my thing. So it's not necessarily a problem if law enforcement or sheriff speaks to these groups. But, if it is a group with anti-government views or with problematic views, then yeah, that is something that is concerning.
Very good. So another question we have, can you comment on the groups that are currently active in the Pacific Northwest, such as 14 First and the Base?
I don't believe the base is as active as they were. Their leader was exposed in Russia, I think. So the base isn't as active. These groups kind of come and go, especially these accelerationist groups like the base, like Feuerkrieg, like Atomwaffen Division, and so while they're absolutely concerning, what we're really seeing the most from in terms of the Pacific Northwest are militia groups, but mostly Proud Boys and groups like Patriot Prayer, who are these far right sort of free speech, but let's go into the street and fight as much as possible kind of groups. They've been extremely active over the summer in Portland, as you no doubt have seen, and they're active throughout the Pacific Northwest. The Proud Boys have many chapters in the Pacific Northwest, and so yeah. I mean, you guys know there's a history of right wing organizing in the Pacific Northwest from the late 70s. So a lot of that stuff is still active, and it's been added to by these new groups.
Wonderful. I think let's do a couple more questions, and then we can move on to Miri, and we can always circle back and do more at the end if that's all right with you. Okay, so the next question for you is, does the ADL maintain a publicly available registry or listing of political candidates who have expressed support for QAnon, the Proud Boys, and so forth?
We do not have such a list. We have a digest that we publish now twice a week whenever, and one of the things that goes into that digest is problematic statements from elected officials and candidates. And just today I put in a candidate in Delaware who's been tweeting "Where we go one, we go all," which is a QAnon term. So we don't have a comprehensive list, but every time something crops up, then that's where that goes.
Excellent, thank you. So next question, how credible is the information these days from the Southern Poverty Law Center about identifying extremist groups active around the country?
Very. We have different definitions than they do. We don't use the word hate group, for instance, and we have different methodology. But as far as I know, and I'm a little bit biased, of course, because I'm friends with a lot of the researchers at SPLC, but they do really good work. The recent expose of Stephen Miller, the White House advisor, disseminating white nationalist literature, was from the SPLC. So they work differently from us, and we see our work kind of as complementary. We do different things, but yeah, I would say their work is solid.
Excellent. Okay, I have had a couple more questions come in, so I'm going to ask them, and then after that, we'll move on to Miri. So we've been told we may not know the result of the presidential election on November 3rd on that day, but in the event that it seems likely that Biden will win, what is in place to prevent violence in the streets across the country? Is there hope of preventing violence that might occur?
I'm not privy to how federal and state and city law enforcement work. I'm crossing every finger and every toe that they have something in place. And I know that this is something that they're concerned about, of course. And we are in conversation with them, and we're sending them things that we flag and that we're concerned about. So, I think and I hope that police and law enforcement have this well in hand. Of course, if there's a dispute around the result, if either of the candidates win by anything less than a landslide, I think the potential for unrest and trouble is certainly there. So go out and vote.
Indeed. And the last question for the moment anyway, what can we do to help? Someone asks.
Go out and vote. Look, just kind of, what can you guys do to help? Be
I have a lot
active
on this in my slides, but you talked about extremism.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we don't encourage everyone to go out and punch Nazis, but find out what's going on, who our allies are in the street. Make sure that people know that this isn't okay. There are a lot of people who are concerned about right-wing extremism, and how can you organize? How can you help look out for marginalized communities? Look, I mean, we all have to be aware of our privilege, I think, and I say that as a white Norwegian male who couldn't have it any better. So, be aware of how fortunate you are and try to look out for those who aren't as fortunate as you are, and help them out. And again, for the love of God, go vote.
Thank you. I appreciate that message.
And I have to say, vote for whoever you want to, because we're a 501c3. So I'm not telling you who to vote for. Just go vote.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Vegas. I know you'll stay on hand here while Miri presents, but I really appreciate your point of view and all of your work on this issue.
Thank you for all your questions.
Yeah, agreed. And if folks want to add questions, as long as we have time, we can address more at the end. Right now, I'd like to introduce Miri Cypers. Miri is the regional director for the Pacific Northwest office of the ADL, a national anti-hate organization that has worked to combat anti-Semitism and discrimination for more than a century. The Northwest office, which is based in Seattle, was established 75 years ago and serves the communities of Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington through educational programs, community and law enforcement training, and civil rights advocacy. Miri has a long-standing commitment to social justice and has worked for almost a decade in government and for advocacy organizations. She most recently served as Director of Federal Affairs and Partnerships at Giffords, which is the gun violence prevention organization in Washington, D.C., founded by former Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. So without further ado, we're very pleased to have you here today, Miri.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Neil, and thank you to everybody for joining us. It's a tough act to follow because Vegas is really interesting and sharing a lot of really interesting content. But we thought it would be really helpful for folks to complement his kind of issue expertise with a broader overview of not only ADL as a larger national organization, but really hone in on what we do here in the Pacific Northwest and how folks in the Spokane Valley and really throughout Washington State and our greater region can get involved. So what do I do, Neil, to pull up my slides?
Okay, so you want to hit screen share once you have your presentation up.
Oh, I'll just screen share it. Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, if that would be all right.
Totally fine. Okay, let me just grab it. 1 second, guys. Okay, I'm back. Share my screen. Thank you for your patience.
Of course.
So as I said, I'm the regional director for ADL in the Pacific Northwest. We are based in Seattle, but serve the entire region. And increasingly during COVID, we are thinking every day more about accessibility. As you might know, the mission of the ADL, which has been around for over 100 years, is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure fair and just treatment for all. And that kind of duality is really important to us and still really informs our work today in terms of our focus on anti-Semitism and fighting hate, and at the same time advancing equity and civil rights for all people. And the ADL is a national organization, and the way that we deliver our local programs and resources is through 24 regional offices based in the United States. So we certainly have a large territory here in the Northwest, but we're constantly learning, and it's constantly challenging us to be better at our jobs. So what exactly do we do here? I wanted to kind of go through a few different buckets so you have a better sense of what local programs we can deliver in Eastern Washington and sort of how we're servicing the region at large. So the ADL takes a really holistic and integrated approach to fighting anti-Semitism and hate. We believe that hate and anti-Semitism are ideas and beliefs that young people are not born with, but they are learned over time. And we're really committed to not only fighting anti-Semitism through our educational work, but really being a wide-scale provider of anti-bias education, which is really foundational to our work in our education programs. So we're one of the largest providers of anti-bias education nationwide, which is not necessarily something that folks might know about the ADL. And we really hone our work a lot in K through 12 schools. And we have a few different programs that we offer here in the Pacific Northwest that we're excited to be offering in Eastern Washington, as well as the Puget Sound and really communities across the region. One is a No Place for Hate initiative, which is a framework for K through 12 schools to basically work throughout the school year to create respectful, inclusive, and diverse school communities. And when I started with the ADL, it was sort of right around post 2016, where we were seeing a real uptick in anti-Semitism and bias-based incidents, not only in community settings, but really in schools as well. So we've steadily built up the number of schools we're working in to 25 right now in 3 states in the Pacific Northwest, primarily divided into Washington and Oregon. And we reach about 25,000 students now each school year. And especially in the time of COVID, it's been really essential for us to adapt all of our education programs to be virtual and think really creatively about how to support students and schools. And one area of real growth, especially after the summer with so much interest in racial inequities and civil rights issues, has been a real thirst and hunger, especially from teachers for our programs. So we've actually been able to offer reach a little over 1,000 educators, including in Spokane, where we did, we co-partnered with the educational, the ESD there to do a training for educators this summer. And we are able to reach now about like over 3,000 students in the past year, which we hope will continue to grow. So we've really adapted everything to be virtual, and we're really looking forward to continue to growing our presence in Eastern Washington, not only in the community, but in our school systems as well. We also do, as Vegas mentioned, a lot of training for law enforcement around various issues, very closely aligned with what he and his colleagues do when issues arise around white supremacy or particular events or incidents in a community. You know, we are there to sort of offer information and offer a support system and to let people know what's happening to Jewish and other marginalized communities. We also train law enforcement on hate crimes and how to better respond when they do happen. And we really try to engage diverse stakeholders in this kind of fight against hate, whether they're community organizations or law enforcement, viewing that we really need a large cadre of people to be involved in this fight. And I would say the third bucket of what we do is advocacy, which is civil rights advocacy, really in the state legislature, at the local level, in Congress, and in the courts. In Washington State, we've been really fortunate to be able to pass a lot of strong bills in the legislature in recent years, testifying in Olympia, trying to offer our resources to legislators. And most recently this past session, really leading efforts to talk more about how hate and harassment are not only happening on the ground, but in the online space, and what that means for not only the Jewish community, but other diverse communities. And we passed a law that deals with the issue of swatting, and we're increasingly seeing a lot of acts of swatting and doxing and online hate and harassment targeting diverse communities, journalists, elected officials, et cetera. So we're really trying to think about what we're seeing on the ground today, but also what the future looks like as well in terms of legislation and policy and how we can be really proactive. And then I would say the fourth bucket is tracking and speaking out against hate. And this is where we really rely on the information that community members share with us when they see vandalism in the community or might have a question about some language that they saw or a symbol or a hate-related event that took place in a school or really in any place. That's a place where we really rely on information from folks who are on the ground. We support people in a variety of ways, you know, using our civil rights knowledge in our legal team, and we can really be advocates to speak out to the public and to the media about some of the trends that we see that are going on in society that are troubling. So those are in, you know, 4 little buckets, what we do here. And I think, as you can imagine, we're seeing some trends unfold that are kind of continued over a few years and some that are new in 2020. I mean, I think, unfortunately, as we're all too familiar, we're seeing continued spikes in anti-Semitism and general hate crimes. Although Washington State is a wonderful and fabulous place to live, unfortunately, we also have the 3rd highest per capita rate of hate crimes in the United States, and the 4th highest number, trailed only by some states with really large populations like California and New York. So while that does also reflect that reporting is probably better here than in some other places, we know that we also have a lot of challenges. As Vegas, you know, referenced pretty thoroughly in his presentation, unfortunately, we're all too familiar with white supremacy and domestic extremism happening sometimes in our own backyards. So that's a continued trend that we monitor and respond to really aggressively. And as Vegas also referenced, we're increasingly concerned about not only domestic extremism with the election, but elected officials using what we view as really inappropriate, often anti-Semitic rhetoric, whether they're talking about COVID policies or other sorts of policies that we don't believe has a place in our political discourse. So we've been actively, you know, speaking out and trying to respect our 501c3 status, but at the same time using our voice to kind of assert leadership where we really feel like elected officials need to be held to a higher standard. So in terms of what people can do to really help us advance our work and hopefully bring meaningful change and value to your community, we are always looking for partners for our educational programs and are always happy to share from our Director of Education and Education team about different learning opportunities, whether they're in school-based settings or for teachers or for general community members. We're always happy to explore what certain needs are and interests are and how the ADL can be there to support people. We've also, in the COVID era, where we really wanted to be more on the ground in Spokane this year, but it just hasn't been a reality for us. We've launched a lot of different virtual community programs so people can learn on a monthly or semi-monthly basis about different pressing civil rights and social justice issues. And we've gathered experts from throughout the Pacific Northwest who talk about what does kind of xenophobia look like in the COVID era, or what are some of the trends with cyber hate, or how can we ensure education and equity in K through 12 schools. So we're trying to do our best to kind of meet the needs of contemporary topics and meet people where they are today, which is in their homes. I also suggest 2 really helpful ways to sort of learn more about our local work and local opportunities for involvement are through our regional newsletter and also on social media, where we post a lot of our press statements. We post articles that we think are compelling and interesting and kind of top of mind for people in the Pacific Northwest based on local incidents that are going on. So I wanted to share a quick slide about some of the community programs that we've been hosting this year, just to give you a little bit more of a taste of what we've done. As I mentioned before, we've focused on cyber hate and racism and sort of voting rights and how to ensure more equity when it comes to the ballot box. So there are a lot of different top of mind social justice issues that we've been tackling, and look forward to continue to offer those kinds of programs well into next year. And I would also say, I know that the election is, of course, very, very top of mind for people as we're a couple days away. And we have a lot of different resources on our website if it might be helpful for people to learn more about, you know, how to make your voice heard, etc. So I just wanted to kind of raise that resource as one that might be helpful to folks. We have some past programs that we've done on voting rights that might be interesting for people to learn more about that topic if you'd like to. And then I would also say, as Vegas said, reporting incidents to ADL is a really, really crucial way that we learn about what is going on in local communities. You know, as a staff, we can't be everywhere at once, but when we have people who are reporting to us and letting us know what they're seeing and hearing, it's tremendously helpful. And we can not only assist people, but compile that data and be a voice to the public about what we're seeing. So the image on the left is just our general incident reporting form, and it's really kind of an open-ended, you know, anti-Semitism, bias, discrimination kind of catch-all form that people can fill out for our office. But a more specific initiative that we've launched that's very election specific is around people seeing anything hateful or kind of white supremacist related to the election. They can easily text a number, and we have a number of staff members who are kind of triaged and devoted to that sort of response right now and into the coming weeks. So with that, I'd love to open it up to questions.
Very good, Miri. Thank you. Feel free to put questions in the chat. We did get one already that you probably seeing too, Miri. Are the PowerPoints available for download or online?
I mean, I could send them to you, Neil, if you want to disseminate them to the group. I'd be more than happy to.
Sounds good. Sounds
okay.
Good. And then you mentioned swatting, and you put Kendall put a link to the ADL's page on swatting in the chat, but I also don't know if everyone knows what doxing is. So maybe quickly, what doxing and swatting are.
Yeah, we're unfortunately seeing, you know, the real growth of a lot of new trends that are focused on online hate and harassment, but are having real world impacts on people. Doxing comes kind of like as a shorthand for the word document, which is basically the sharing of people's confidential or private information, like their home address or their cell phone number, with the intent to intimidate or harass them. We've seen it a lot kind of among various groups in the far right and the far left. And unfortunately, it's a trend that we've also seen for people to use to intimidate law enforcement, journalists, and elected officials. And it's something that we're looking into in terms of policy remedies, because we're really concerned about that issue. And swatting is the one that we kind of started with in Washington with a initiative that we have called Backspace Hate, which is focused on people basically falsely reporting some sort of crime to law enforcement with the intent that a SWAT team would go to someone's house. And we saw a pretty prominent incident play out in the Seattle area with the author So You Want to Talk About Race, Ijeoma Olu. It happened to her son, and we've also heard about it from a lot of other constituents in Washington state. So we were proud to work with a really diverse coalition to push that through in the legislature this past year, and it was just signed as kind of COVID hit. So we were grateful that the governor was able to move that forward. And I definitely expect these to be kind of top of mind issues and policies that people from across many states are probably going to be delving into well in the years to come, as our online world is our world right now. So those are some issues that we've been focusing on at ADL, and under our national CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, who came to the ADL about 5 years ago, he really has viewed the importance of engaging with tech companies, holding them accountable, and also pushing forward innovative policies to be a really interesting and important area of our work to fight hate today, but also tomorrow as well. So we have a whole center set up in Silicon Valley with experts who really just look at monitoring and understanding trends related to online hate and harassment, working with tech companies, at times calling them out. We recently had a pretty big victory for after almost 10 years of holding Facebook's feet to the fire, they finally banned Holocaust denial on their platform. So there's certainly a lot of work in that space that's continuing to grow. So that's a little bit more.
Very good, thank you. We've also had a request now for Vegas's PowerPoint. So one way or another, if that could find its way to me, I can give it to those who are interested, who are in attendance. Another question, does the ADL take a position on issues such as the two-state solution, referencing Israel-Palestine?
Yeah, we absolutely take positions on different issues. I would say here in the Pacific Northwest, we tend to focus a little bit more on domestic policies. It seems like our constituents are really interested in what's going on in the Washington legislature and other places where we can really make meaningful changes at a more local level. But certainly the ADL has an entire international affairs team that works on various policies, whether they're Israel related or in the Middle East or even Latin America or other places where we're seeing anti-Semitism or hate-related activities targeting different communities. So the ADL has historically taken a position that we support a two-state solution, and that's something that we've believed for many years and will continue to do well into the future.
Okay, thank you. Another question, does your hate incident reporting system have a component of responding to the reporter when requested, or are you just documenting?
We always reply to everybody who writes to us. Sometimes people's requests are within our ability to serve them, and sometimes they're not. But it's not just a mechanism for collecting data, it's actually assisting people when they have legitimate and credible issues. I would say probably the most frequent one we get is people seeing something white supremacist or hate related in a community or in a school setting. So the kind of typical thing that we do is we share resources with people to better educate them about what they saw. We offer to liaise with law enforcement if they haven't contacted them yet or don't feel like they've received a sufficient response. In schools, we offer, if parents or students want us to correspond directly with principals or administrators in a school to offer our expertise and strategy and programs. So there are a lot of different ways that we help people. And although we're not necessarily a legal provider, we have attorneys on staff who are really familiar with civil rights laws. So there are times when we can help people advocate when they experience discrimination. Like we've had cases in the past where people, have felt like they've experienced religious discrimination in a housing complex, for example, or in a workplace, and we've contacted an employer or a housing facility to kind of talk about, what the laws are and why we are concerned and urging them to kind of change their behavior. So there are definitely a lot of different ways that we seek to support people. And we've seen a huge growth in incidents this year. And I think part of it's just the world and part of it's just better reporting as ADL is kind of upping our profile here. But we've had over 300 credible hate incidents reported to our office in Washington alone this year, and it's only October. And I think last year we had like 200. So we're definitely seeing a lot of escalation and there's a lot of need right now.
Okay. So I have one comment to read out for everyone, and then if there are any other questions before we conclude for either Miri or Vegas, people are welcome to add them to the chat. The comment is that this morning, apparently there was a good episode of a news analysis show On Point on NPR regarding how democracies slide into authoritarianism. So for those who are familiar with the program or would like to check it out, that's a recommendation from one of our attendees. So any other questions or comments for either Miri or Vegas from our attendees? Well, looks like people have asked their questions and made their comments. But I really want to thank both of you for taking the time today. I know this is unfortunately a very timely issue, and it's really good to hear from people who are knowledgeable and authoritative on the subject. So thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thanks for joining us, Vegas.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Take care, everybody. Be safe and healthy, and please be in touch if you ever need anything.
Indeed. And if you have any other questions that occur to you later, you can email them to me and I will forward them on to Miri.
Okay.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Be well. Stay safe.